Right, I'm sitting here with Naomi Pocock, candidate for the Hamilton East 2021 by-election, and we have a sign up the back, in case you didn't recognise their face. See, same person.
People have said they don't. They look at me and they're like, "Oh, you don't look like your sign." So.
Well, it's quite funny because often, like as a photographer, when you take photographs of people, the prep for taking a really nice photograph is completely different than the prep for just going outside and interacting with people every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, you're standing for the election, by-election, I should say. So, now, as I've mentioned before, normally I would do the why should we vote for you thing, but because this is a by-election and we tend to sort of vote differently because I can pick an issue, and my issue for this by-election is cycling. The council, we've got a council at the moment who are doing really well when it comes to looking at cycling and safer cities and joining people and communities together through things like cycling and parks and walking and things like this, because one's got to admit that cycling does put you in touch with more people more often, and so they're doing a good job of that. Then there's groups around Hamilton that advise the council, get out and do mass biking events to make people aware and all this sort of thing. And there's things that some of these groups would like done in Hamilton that council hasn't yet really looked at, I don't think. Although this council's probably done more for cycling than any council before it. So my question to you is, if you got elected, what would be your approach to cycling? Like,
yes.
Obviously, as a politician, you must have a view on, and you must be aware of what's happening with cycling, and that it's picking up, it's becoming more common. No matter what some people say, it is becoming very popular, and that's only going up. A lot of businesses I know that sell bikes, and particularly electric bikes, say they're not having reduced sales, their sales continually climbing. So what would you look at doing, both with the things council are looking at doing and proposing and fussing about and trying to find money for and all this sort of thing, and the things that some of the community groups want in this area?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. Cycling is an important issue, and I'm a cyclist. I love to cycle. I've got some cool pink handlebars on my bike, which I just love. I tend to cycle out in the countryside around here just because I feel safer, which is a bit ironic because you're going, really fast, and if there was an accident, it would be, pretty messy. But I feel safer in cycling in the countryside than through town, when there's not clear cycle paths that have good flow and easy access, rather than jump on this curb and jump off over here and go over here and there, and it's all very confusing. I did go cycling over in Tauranga recently, Tauranga Bay of Plenty, and it was a wonderful experience. Not just because of the climate and the lovely beach down at the Mount, but it was just a wonderful, an easy flow experience. And so that's what if cycling and driving need to be, and walking. Yeah. So those three modes of transport and these different mobility things that are coming in, they all require, us to look at the infrastructure from a different perspective, because different people are using it in different ways. And so the thing that I'm my big policy for this election is this concept of urban design planning, where you design a city from a big picture, city vision type perspective. So this is what they did in Melbourne 30 years ago, and the guy who was on the panel that advised the Melbourne City Council 30 years ago on how to design a city that flows well from a public transport, off-road network, people, cars perspective, and as a nice lifestyle for people with parks and etc., amenities. The same guy advised the Auckland City Council at the same time with more or less the same advice. Now Melbourne followed his advice.
It's clear Auckland didn't.
Did not. And so if Hamilton doesn't have, because we are going to grow, right? We know Hamilton's going to grow. Yeah. And it's likely to grow, exponentially, in my opinion. because of other things that other councils around the countryside are going to be busy dealing with, that Hamilton doesn't have that problem, which we can talk about later.
Hamilton's nearly 3 times bigger than when I shifted here in '87.
Yeah, so it's going to grow, and I want it to grow well. And if we don't have a strong urban design plan that the citizens buy into, then we are going to become another Auckland, and that's what I don't want to happen.
That's a horrifying thought.
Yes, so that includes strong off-road transport networks, which includes the cycleways. It's really important. But the citizens have to buy into it. And so what I've been doing a lot of door knocking. And when the cycling thing comes up, a lot of people have said to me, they're changing this and they're narrowing my street, or why are they closing this street just down there for cyclists, etc. And so when the citizenship doesn't buy into it, then you get that rub. Yeah. And so my approach and what I'm proposing is that residents have a voice in the decision-making process. So they're not just consulted with from a top-down approach. We're going to do this, we're consulting with you, give us your feedback, we'll take what we want from that and decide whether or not we're going to ignore you. Rather, citizens, and this works well overseas, where citizens are involved in the decision-making of the city vision. Okay. And so through things like citizens' assemblies, which is where you get a randomly selected group of people who represent the population. So they are representative of...
Almost like doing jury duty.
Yep, a little bit like that, exactly. So they're they're not just randomly selected, they're also representative of the population. So you'll represent by demographic, by age, gender, and etc.
Yeah.
And then so they're representative of the population, and they come in to a citizens' assembly, and they are firstly informed by the experts, by the urban design planners, by the people who design cities, by the people who understand what goes into a city design. So they become informed from a balanced perspective. If it's a controversial issue, you need to make sure it's a balanced perspective. But
and almost every issue is going to be controversial nowadays.
Right. But it includes things like water, right? How do we manage the water flow as the city grows and expands and intensifies? Good. Making sure we're protecting the Awa, the river.
And that's a big one at the moment with the Waikato, in particular Hamilton.
Yeah. So they become informed by a range of experts, and then they debate the issues and have the discussions and raise the questions, because they're representative of the population. Okay. And finally, they make recommendations. And those are the recommendations that council would then follow and put into what I'm proposing as a 30-year vision for how we want the city to look, and then put that into there, and then everything else comes under that. Yeah. And so what we've got at the moment is just a 10-year plan, which is basically sprawl more. Yeah. And it really concerns me.
I noticed just about, as far as I can tell, all the new developments are accounting for alternative modes of transport, both in the layout of the roads. So we're not starting with skinny roads, we're trying to add cycle lanes too. They're starting with, this is how much room the car needs, now we add on this amount of room, and that's how wide the actual road is, or the road plus the separated cycle lane, all this sort of thing. I notice in a lot of these, they're doing the wider paths, like on Wairiri Drive, which, in my view, are quite safe for both pedestrians and bikes to use, so long as we're respectful of each other.
As the city grows, as we have more and more people using them, hard to say at this point, right?
Yeah, but they are wide, really wide footpaths. Yeah. And if we are, both as cyclists and pedestrians, respectful of each other, and use, if it goes slower than me, I'll give way to it approach, which is what cyclists want on the road. Yeah. If you're a car driver, I as a cyclist go slower than you, so give way to me, sort of thing. Well, we need to do that with pedestrians on those wider footpaths. The thing that annoys pedestrians most is skinny little footpaths with cyclists on. Yeah.
And what's important as we are developing that, as you say Pocock's, for example, is going to, is considering all of these things, then those people need to be able to flow all the way into the city in a safe way. No point getting to, point B and then the cycleway turns to something that's unsafe.
Yeah,
Do you know what I
and
mean? Like,
that's one of the problems with the core part of the existing city.
Yeah.
Is like we've got the trail that follows the railway line. That's a good idea.
yeah,
We've got the stuff on Wairiri Drive, which is a good start. They're looking at Peachgrove Road to join all those schools together because I didn't realise until I was at a meeting with Bike Waikato, just sitting there listening to someone talk. I didn't realise exactly how many schools were along Peachgrove Road.
yeah, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought, oh yeah, that makes sense because you've got Peacock's Road, joins all those schools, then
Yeah.
connects to the university.
Yeah.
So we need to make a cycling highway
Yeah.
along there of some sort.
It's something that's safe for children
Yeah.
as well. And, and something that, if it is a dedicated cycle way that you need to keep people safe on, then the traffic shouldn't be able to utilise that as well.
Yeah, and it needs to be maintained well.
Yeah.
And you brought up children. Now, this is the other thing that occurred to me a while back, is I've been riding all my life, right? I don't know the concept of owning a car and driving a car. I ride everywhere, right? I don't have kids, but I know people who are getting their kids back onto bikes and riding to school and this sort of thing. And it did occur to me that there is a difference in my level of understanding of riding a bike and a 10-year-old's.
Yeah.
Because
course.
they are not as worldly and experienced as me.
Exactly.
So they're not quite as aware of how to be safe on the road. So therefore the separation away from the traffic is important.
Crucial
Yeah.
for school kids.
Plus, I think training, as a kid I was brought up cycling. It was normal.
Yeah.
Everyone rode a bike to
Yeah.
school,
It
right?
was safer then,
But
wasn't
I think we need to start looking at some sort of training regime to help kids understand what's required in riding a bike. This also needs to spill over into a lot of adults that are getting back onto bikes. I know there's the council have got a program for teaching kids in schools to ride bikes, and they do occasional rides around Hamilton where they are teaching adults how to be safer on bikes, because I've attended a lot of those.
Right.
Bike Waikato do a few during summer, which are particularly aimed at getting people back on bikes, but safely by teaching them.
Yes.
But I think the council could take more of a proactive approach to having, instead of just one day a year that's to do with cycling, have a number of, especially during the good parts of the year when it's nice weather to get out and ride, have a number of events that are well promoted and really not just push the use of cycling, but are focused at having everyone muck in to help other cyclists learn to be safe on the road.
Well, so I'm also the education spokesperson for the Opportunities Party, so
Oh, okay.
I have a lot to say about
There
education.
you
go. And yes, absolutely, and cycling can easily be tied into the curriculum in terms of the physical education, the science of bike building. You could bring it in so many ways. Literacy, and when kids are engaged in their topic that they're learning about because they've had some experience of it, then they are more interested in writing about a story about it, etc.
Your ideas would work well with council because we've got a council that's receptive to that now.
And I think the other thing to consider is that because the other conversation that I've had with people on my door knocking experience is, you don't see enough cyclists using this thing that they've created in my little neighbourhood. And it's like the chicken or the egg, do you build the infrastructure first to get people out of their cars and ensure that they feel safe? Because if they're not safe, then they'll get back in their car. And so the whole benefit, the big benefit for Hamilton East in particular, of getting people into the cycle lanes and safe cycle lanes is that it'll reduce congestion because you'll have less people in their cars.
Yeah.
And so if you're a person who likes to drive your car and you never cycle, it benefits you as well because you'll have less congestion on your route to wherever you're trying to go.
Yeah.
And so that urban design plan of flowing traffic through a city, whether that traffic is on road or off road, flowing that through a city is so important.
Yeah.
But you need a whole big, you need a big visionary picture plan, and you need buy-in from the citizens.
Yeah.
It's so important.
And I think we need to stop the fighting or the tug of war over cars versus bikes and look at bikes as just an alternative for those that want to use them. And I know a few people who move to a bike in summer to go to work and hate it when it comes to winter because they just have to use a car, and they say that they get used to riding a bike and not worrying about congestion, and then come winter again, they're back sitting.
But look in Amsterdam and the Scandinavian countries where their weather is terrible and they still cycle all year round.
Yeah.
So I say there's a saying over in places like Denmark, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing.
Yeah.
And so you get yourself all rugged up and it's still fine. I mean, I cycle in the winter, put some
Same
gloves
here.
on, get cold fingers, put some good gloves on, away we go.
I was a bit shocked this year that I was still able to, through winter, ride around in shorts and sandals. That makes me sort of go, there is definitely climate warming.
It's a mild winter.
Because, it was definitely a mild winter.
The other point about this congestion flow and the intensification of the city, etc., that I think we need to talk about is, we're looking to intensify Hamilton City. At the moment, we've sort of got a little bit of a hodgepodge development-led plan where a developer wants to put something up that goes up instead of having a plan, a detailed plan. Like we've got a plan over Hayes Common, for example, that is to remain heritage, and most people are following that, not all, but most, and it is remaining looking like it's supposed to. And so that kind of plan over the inner city where we say this area, this is where we want our buildings, this is where we want our cycleways and pathways, this is where we want our nice parks for the people who are going to live in these buildings so that they have a nice lifestyle is crucial. At the moment, it's just developer put up a 6-story building here, there and everywhere, wherever you like, and I don't know if you've heard that they're taking the development contributions off anything above 6 stories.
No, I didn't actually know. That's not how I would incentivise intensification in the city. I think the other problem that all big cities in New Zealand have is the lack of investment in the underground infrastructure over the last 100 years. So I'm talking about the water pipes, the sewage pipes, three waters, sewage, waste and water pipes under the city. And if Hamilton's still got some really old pipes under the ground.
And if we don't invest in that infrastructure, then they are going to start bursting as these 6-story buildings go up all over the place and people are living in them. Yeah. And I'm worried that this council is going to say, well, we solved the housing, we contributed to solving housing supply, which is important, but then the pipes will start bursting, sewage spews everywhere, and they've walked away. So really important we invest in the infrastructure. How do we do that? Historically through development contributions, which are now being taken off for these particular buildings. Do not want it to be going on ratepayers whose rates are already going to go up, which then flows on to rents, right? And housing is already unaffordable enough without raising rents and rates. And so and this is a top party policy, would lobby for central government to use Hamilton as a pilot program for investment in intensification by returning the GST on all new developments to local council. So that's what we want the central government to be doing across the nation. So at the moment, the central government's looking at amalgamating all water and taking it all back to a central thing. That I can't see that working well. And the investment that they're putting into it is about the same amount that they would have to return year on year to councils for intensifying all the cities around the nation, all the big urban areas. So we have this policy: get central government to just return the GST on new developments back to councils to enable them to invest in the infrastructure, both below ground and above ground, to enable intensification to be done well. Yeah. Because if we don't do that, if we don't invest in this intensification plan, there are two options. Either pipes start bursting, which they have been already, and when there's this big storm event, all the sewage goes into the Waitemata Harbour in Auckland and you can't swim at the beaches. And the other option is just to continue to sprawl, which is a very expensive way to do things and is bad for the environment and congestion and emissions and isolated communities and taking the heart out of the city and all of those things. Yeah. So there's good policy, and so that's what I would be strongly lobbying for. Okay. But it needs to be done well. What we don't want is just apartment block with nowhere else. We're sitting here in Claudelands Park, and this is a good example. I mean, we could do with a few barbecues, like they have in other places around the world where people can go and just use a free barbecue and then clean it up afterwards, and the whole community gets to use it. We could do with a little bit more sort of events in this park. I know they have some, but we could have more. But it's such a beautiful space, and the beautiful Kaikatea walkway with the boardwalks through there is amazing. And quite well signposted in terms of the history of how it used to be, how the whole city used to be Kaikatea, a swamp, right?
Yeah.
And then, and how it's grown since then. So this is a good example. More like this. And talking about communication and that Ward Street, Ross Trevor Street debate, again, this is the difference between a top-down, we're going to do this to you and give us your feedback approach, to everybody involved in the decision making, and that kind of hodgepodge trial approach is a waste of ratepayer money. When people get so worked up about it, it is really unfortunate that somebody, there was good intention, but it's so unfortunate that the citizenship wasn't brought along in that decision making process. And so this is where, when you run things like citizens' assemblies and things, and you get people together to go, okay, this is your backyard, this is important to you, these are some design concepts and how it flows and how it connects and how it works with everybody else. So we need to work together to make these decisions rather than top-down hierarchy.
I always thought it would be interesting to do if they did something like, say, okay, we're going to make one street in Hamilton car-free completely, and you all get to vote on what street that's going to be. Be interesting to see, because it would be interesting to see the outcome and what street people would feel, especially if central city.
I mean, that would be an interesting poll to do. I think the thing about the voting, the referendum voting approach that we've had, historically is, you don't know, what question do you ask? What's the question that we ask? And so again, with these citizens' assemblies, this happened in Ireland. They had a citizens' assembly in Ireland around the idea of the abortion referendum that was coming up. So before they did the referendum, they ran a big citizens' assembly, people that were representative of the population, and obviously it was a very controversial debate in Ireland. It was, so people felt that they had their say. Both sides felt that they were being represented in this discussion that was occurring in the citizens' assembly, because it took time over a period of time as well. And it's not like jury service where you're not allowed to talk about it. You go back and talk about it, and you raise issues, you have the conversations, and it was really effective. And so there was some information, both sided, a balanced approach in terms of informing the citizens that were representing the population, and a really good discussion and debate that happened. And as a result of that citizens' assembly came out the question to ask in the referendum. So, for example, in our referendum we just voted on, do you support the cannabis legislation as it exists, or do you support the euthanasia legislation? It was about the legislation, the draft bill or whatever. Who reads the legislation apart from people like me? People don't read the legislation.
People like me who go, I should read that.
Too late. Or, So the question that was asked in Ireland came out of a citizens' assembly. And the citizens' assembly predicted within 2% the result, and that then did eventuate in the referendum. So that was a very effective way to run, that whole process. So I'm not saying do that every time there's a question, but I'm just saying that as an example of an alternative to the referendum voting type approach.
Yes, because each election where we've had a referendum of any sort, the biggest issue has been over the way the question is worded.
Exactly. Like the flag one, where we were presented with 4 flags, 3 of which were pretty much the same. So, totally.
It's that whole thing of, and that was based on the assumption that people would want a change of flag.
Or that, and that's right, exactly, and that somebody decided somewhere that they quite liked this design, so they put 3 of them and that were quite similar. You know,
Yeah.
was what, you know, who has the power to do that when you're actually trying to ask the citizens?
It sort of
a
reminds me
question?
of Britain's Brexit thing
Yeah,
at the moment. It's like that turned to a complete mess.
Oh, man.
I watch a comedy show that discusses it a fair bit,
Right.
with a twist of humour.
Yes.
But if you look at the actual issue itself, it's quite interesting to see that what turned from a do we stay in the European Union, do we go, has turned into quite a major issue
Major.
because most of the people voting didn't really know the consequences.
Yes.
And this comes back to what you're saying about these
Consequences, that's right.
groups.
They're informed.
How often are people voting without proper information?
Yeah.
Like you say,
All the time.
How many people read the legislation?
Yes.
So when they say, "Do you agree with the blah blah legislation?"
Yeah.
I don't.
I haven't
know.
read it, so I better say no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because often the default is I probably
Or-
don't agree with some
Or
legislation.
they heard, you know, on the cannabis one, there was a big vote no to dope campaign. Big. And a lot of what they were saying was incorrect. Incorrect. When
Yeah.
you read the legislation, you're like, that does not align with what this legislation is actually saying it's going to do. And so that was a problematic campaign, which people heard the campaign, but who reads the legislation and understands what the actual legislation
Yeah, and
is?
in that case, it comes down to which side of the campaign's got the most money to throw at it.
Exactly.
Right. Now-
I mean, it's a anyway.
You understand that happens with elections. It's to some degree. Think about elections, not so, and there are limitations on what candidates can spend.
Yeah,
But so that restricts that a bit. But in an election, if you've got someone who can spend up to the limit and someone who can't,
yeah.
then you can sort of tell how well the election's going to go for
Yeah.
each of those people.
It's an unfortunate part of our democracy.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and
But
it's
when
unfair.
you get issues like this in a referendum,
yeah,
where basically if you've got enough support on one side or the other and can get the funding to put out massive billboards all over the places, there's literally no limitation. Any businessman or whatever can suddenly decide, I don't want this to happen, so I'm going to pour a lot of money into it. And there's no limit on
Yeah.
it. So therefore, if the side that wants the exact opposite doesn't have a lot of wealthy supporters,
yeah.
it's not going to go well for them, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's problematic. Absolutely.
But so one last thing.
Sure.
What would be your last statement to do with cycling and where the council's going, and if you got elected, where it would go with you on board?
I mean, I agree with you. I think that this council is doing a good job at connecting with and working with the groups that are interested in that particular issue, the bike waikato, etc. And so they are sort of more forward-thinking than previous councils. And it seems to me from the outside that there is some cohesion within this council when you compare it to some other councils that are completely falling apart and, you know, needing some sort of commissioner to come in and sort them out. So that's good, you know, that's good.
Thought it was gonna
It's all
fall.
over. No, it's well stuck in there.
Naomi lurching down at me.
So that's really positive. And all I'm saying is that rather, you know, it's important that we bring the whole citizenship along with us, and it's very important that we incorporate the voice of the experts who know how to design cities and how to help people to flow through cities, etc. So rather than sort of a hodgepodge of we're going to do this little bit here and this little bit here and hope it kind of works and ties together, we need that overall arching vision that represents the voice of the people, and that they have a stake in the decision making process, and that people feel like they are represented in that decision is so important.
Yeah.
And finally, you know, ultimately, I don't want us to become another Auckland. That is where we are going in terms of our current plans. Literally, it is mostly about sprawl. And while this council might be doing this, what happens when the next council comes and the next council? So if what we need is that overarching vision so that every council, regardless of who's on it, is having to work towards and work under a vision that the city has created, that the city buys into. No, I believe no one in the city would want us to become another Auckland.
No.
So let's make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But currently the plans are sprawl, which is the historic Auckland plan.
Yeah, and that evil is going to come home to roost in the future eventually. I bet you Auckland didn't think they'd be having the difficulties they're having now when they were small.
But we can learn from that. We can learn from that and not repeat it. And we can learn from how have European cities planned their cities for decades to be a well-flowing city for people.
Yeah, and if we've got something that a lot of the citizenship are buying into, taking part in, contributing to, and they know that it's not going to change as soon as the council changes.
Yeah, exactly.
That while the finer points might change,
Yeah.
the overall idea will stay the same.
Yeah.
And this sort of thing.
Yes.
Then I think people will feel a lot better about
Yes.
where they are,
Yeah.
and less negative and
Yeah.
more willing to contribute in some way and be part of
Yeah.
it. Because
And not feel like it's being done to them. Yeah, that's really
because
important.
really, if you feel you have ownership of it,
Yes,
you're going to feel better about
Yeah.
where you are and what's happening.
and what's changing and where you're living.
And
Absolutely.
the confidence to know that an idea that's set in place now is going to continue on, and while it may take 20 years to get to the final perceived outcome,
Yes.
you know that track is still going to keep going in
right.
that direction.
Exactly.
It's not going to stop in 2 years' time
Yeah.
and then be on pause for 3 years until we
Exactly.
change the council again,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
stop, start all the time.
It is mandated.
Yeah.
It is there. It's set in stone. You know, a good example is the parks. You know, we've had these big investments in these destination playgrounds, which while they may be great and good fun, people have to hop in their car to drive to them. So what about investing in better parks in all the different suburbs and all the different parks, so that the local kids have a place to go and they can, you know, jump on things and climb on things and hang off things in a safe way, you know, all around the city, using their local parks instead of going, Mum, can we go to the Hamilton Lake, you know, so that I can go and play at that destination playground, and they have to hop in their car and drive to it. So it's that kind of stuff. It's that visionary stuff that goes, okay, how do we want the city to look? Do we want it to be, you know, like this, we all hop in our cars to go places? Do we want local parks to be invested in? You know, those kinds of questions.
Yeah, because that's a good example of what happens with youth in particular who don't have the facilities near them to enjoy life.
Yes, that's right.
Be it a skate park or an ordinary park, destination type park, or whatever.
Or other things that youth might.
What
want
happens
to
to those youth when they feel disenfranchised because they can't go?
Yeah.
You know, I've got to wait until Mum's willing to take me to the skate park or something like this. Right?
Exactly. That's so important.
That is the start, the thin edge of the wedge to problem kids and crime and all those things later on.
And they should have a voice. They should have a voice in these citizens' assembly. Okay, youth, what are you guys into? What would you like to see? You know, maybe they don't want a skate park. Maybe they want something different. So let's listen to them and find out what they're after.
Because I noticed there was a couple of things to do with skate park, wanting a skate park in central Hamilton. There was also one in Melville was needing doing up and went through quite a few changes.
Yeah.
Right? Now if you go past it, you see there's a lot of kids use it because it's suitable for what they want it for.
Oh, there's this whole parkour thing, isn't there? You know, that's massive. So what can we do to improve that? You know, because inner city kids should be jumping off things and hanging off things and flinging themselves around the place.
And if you consult with the parkour guys, it's easy to incorporate parkour stuff that suits them into the design that doesn't look like it's got a specific purpose.
Yeah.
Because they will jump off and go under just about anything.
Yeah.
All it needs to be is just enough challenge to be interesting.
Some of them have got such skill, haven't they?
Yeah.
Man,
I spent a day photographing a bunch of them, and I was beginning to think they were a little bit crazy after a while, but watching them, and they have a group that do regular practice and things like this.
That's right. And they get younger kids into it. Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It really is. Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for interviewing me.
Good luck with the interview.
Yes.
Good luck with the the election.
Thank you.
And it's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
Yes.
Because there are quite a few, was it 24 standing?
Yeah.
Which is going to dilute the votes a bit, I think. But I think there's a group of you that are sitting more towards the top.
Right.
That at least will do well.
Yes.
Even though there are quite a few.
Yeah.
But that's part of democracy.
And so I think I would say that we all have, I listened to us speak at the debate, and I think we all have, good ideas, and we want the city to go in the same direction and a nice place for people to live. And I guess how I differentiate myself from what other people are saying is that what other people are saying, those are great ideas that we need to incorporate under this urban design plan, this vision, this 30-year vision for the city. If we don't have that, everything else is just people's ideas in pockets.
Yeah. Because I did notice there were quite a few people standing for specific issues.
Yes.
And if you looked at that as a cluster, you could go, well, actually, there's a whole lot of important issues there. If you could find one person that supported all of those issues, we'd have the perfect situation. Because they were all important issues.
They are issues. They are important issues. That's right. And if the citizenship agrees that those are important issues, then that comes in to the consultation or the decision making process of the urban design vision. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay. You're welcome.